My name is Ava Keller, though most folks who walk into this bar only know me as the woman who wipes down tables and keeps the coffee hot. I do not wear medals anymore. They sit in a drawer somewhere, folded in velvet, quiet as folded wings. Out here, nobody salutes. Nobody calls you ma'am. Out here, you earn respect one silence at a time. Most nights pass the same. A jukebox humming low, boots dragging sawdust on the floor. Young soldiers swaggering in with fresh bravado, talking about glory like it is a place you can point to on a map. Last week, one of them glanced at my old service patch on the wall, smirked, and said, "Air Force, you folks never saw real combat." I just smiled and poured his drink. What they never notice is the scar along my wrist, the one shaped like a falcon's wing, or the photograph tucked behind the bar, edges worn from hands that once trembled. They don't know that some ghosts do not haunt battlefields. They haunt reports sealed by signatures. They haunt names erased to protect others. There was a time I answered a call sign. They spoke it over the radio when fire rained and hope was thin. Ghost Falcon, a name never printed, only whispered. I never corrected them when they called it a rumor. A legend, a lie, but legends have roots, and some truths do not stay buried forever. Tonight, if you are willing to listen, I will tell you how a soldier disappears, and how, sometimes, a whole room will one day rise to prove she never truly did. Before we begin, if you find strength in stories of quiet courage and unseen battles, I invite you to like this video and subscribe to Military Revenge. Your support helps keep these voices alive, especially those of women who wore the uniform and carried the weight long after the war ended. They say you can tell a lot about a soldier by how they sit in silence. Most people fidget, reach for their phone, drum their fingers until someone fills the space for them. But veterans, the real ones, know how to let a silence breathe without trying to strangle it. I have spent years living inside those silences, counting the breaths between what is said and what is meant. That is how I recognized the old Marine sitting in the far corner that night. The one who kept watching the scar on my wrist like it was a memory he could almost name. He did not drink much, just sipped from a small glass and kept his back to the wall. He never spoke to the young soldiers piling in, laughing too loudly, their uniforms still smelling of starch. They had not yet learned how heavy honor becomes once the shine wears off. I wiped the counter, kept to my rhythm, cloth in the left hand, glass in the right. I could feel the heat of their stares. That careless curiosity of youth trying to measure someone they think they understand. One of them nudged another and looked my way. I caught the words Air Force under his breath, followed by the kind of grin that says courage is a joke until you have to wear it. The tallest of them leaned back on his stool, boots crossed like he was settling in at a campfire, and said loudly enough for the room to hear that he had more combat in basic training than most Air Force saw in 10 years. I heard the others chuckle, not cruel, just ignorant. I did not flinch. There was a time when those words would have landed like a blade, reopening something I thought had scarred over. But pain, like rank, teaches you which battles deserve your salute. I wiped a ring of spilled beer from the wood and slid a refill toward him. He blinked, surprised that I had not risen to the bait. Disappointment crossed his face. He wanted to make me angry. Anger is easy. Silence is not. Behind them, a television played muted footage of a ceremony at Arlington. Rows of headstones, a bugler frozen mid-note. No one looked. Patriotism has become a decoration for holidays. War, an argument on cable news. Service, a shirt sold at gas stations. But for some of us, it is the air we still breathe, even when no one remembers our names. The old Marine in the corner leaned forward, his voice a gravel whisper. Ghost Falcon used to wear that same scar. I paused, just a fraction. Most would not notice, but he did. 30 years in the Corps had trained his eyes to track the smallest deviation. I set the glass down. My pulse stayed even. I did not turn. You see, legends born in war rarely belong to a single face. They belong to need, to hope. Men under fire cling to call signs the way drowning men reach for rope. Ghost Falcon was never meant to be a person. It was supposed to be a rumor, a voice over radio, a shadow above smoke, and I intended to keep it that way. The night pressed on. Orders came, glasses emptied, laughter rose, fell, rose again. I cleaned up slowly, watching reflections move in the back bar mirror. The young soldiers were deep into their own tales now, each story louder than the last, each recount of heroism grander than truth would allow. One claimed he had already signed up for Special Forces assessment. Another swore he could strip an M240 blindfolded. They were rehearsing bravery for an audience that did not care. I once did the same, before the desert, before the static on the comms, before I learned that courage is not loud. It is the split second between panic and duty, a quiet that burns through the bones. I stacked clean glasses, careful with the weight. My wrist ached faintly, same as it always did before rain. The scar was pale now, a silver crescent etched into the skin. It had started as a fire. Jagged metal from a downed fuselage, heat so sharp it screamed through flesh. I remember the smell before I remember the pain, but that story belonged to another life, and I had buried it under years of other people's noise. Still, the old Marine kept watching. He did not speak again, but I felt his questions from across the room. Men like him measure truth not by what is said, but by what is withheld. I suppose I had forgotten what it felt like to be seen by someone who knows what to look for. The night began to wind down, the young soldiers drifting into a lazy slouch, the edge of their bravado dulled by alcohol. One of them, the loudest, rubbed a hand over his buzzed head and sighed. I wonder if that Ghost Falcon story is real. My cousin swears someone saved his convoy outside Kandahar, said it was a woman on the radio, but no one ever found her name. Another scoff. Women do not fly close air support like that, not with that kind of steel. I felt something cold rise behind my ribs, not anger, not pride, just the echo of a truth heavier than either. I gathered their empties. Do you need anything else? I asked. My voice came out level. Almost gentle, the tall one squinted at me. Do you know anything about it, that Ghost Falcon guy? I met a man once, I said, who believed ghosts were just those who chose not to be found. Then I turned and carried the glasses away. Behind me I heard a low whistle, a mutter about strange bar ladies and war stories. They would forget me by morning. That was the point. The Marine did not forget. As I passed his table, he spoke without lifting his eyes. They will learn. Someday. I hesitated, just a breath. Thank you, I said. 2 words I had not spoken to another soldier in years. He nodded. We are not so different, he said. Only some of us stayed long enough to know what silence costs. I did not answer. Instead, I finished closing out the register and locked the door behind the last of them. Outside, the night air was cool, still carrying the taste of mesquite and distant highways. I stood beside my truck, feeling the old instincts wake in my spine. Watch your perimeter. Read the horizon. Breathe before moving. In towns like this, people think war ends when the uniform comes off. But the uniform was never the war. It was only the armor. And when armor is gone, what remains is bare and unguarded. That is its own battlefield. My phone buzzed, unknown number. I almost ignored it. Then I saw the Wyoming area code, an old code, a code tied to barracks, to hangars, to smoke-stained rehearsals of loss. I opened the message. It was a photo, blurred, grainy, but unmistakable. A ceremony stage draped in flags, a man at a podium, gray hair, shoulders bowed not from age but from something heavier. Colonel Branson. The text beneath it read, receiving Medal of Honor next week. In attendance, all surviving members of Operation Black River expected. My breath stopped. The world tilted, not with panic but with something colder. Recognition. Memory is a minefield. One wrong step and you are back there, sand grinding in your teeth. The sun is so bright it carves shadows into bone, orders static cut until life becomes measured in coordinates. Operation Black River. The words pulsed in my skull. I closed my eyes. I could still hear the scream of metal. The last transmission, my own call sign breaking through interference. Ghost Falcon, holding station, copy. I opened my eyes across the parking lot. The bar's neon sign flickered, casting wings of red light against the pavement. Somewhere deep inside, something I had kept buried stirred. Not vengeance, not rage, something older. The need to stand, not for recognition, for correction, for the record. If you're still listening, hold this thread. There are truths built not from glory, but from absence. And sometimes the ones erased are the ones who held the line the longest. This story does not begin with a battle. It begins with silence. And tonight, for the first time in years, I felt it breaking. I did not sleep that night. I lay awake with the phone face down, but the image of Branson haunted the dark like a light I could not extinguish. Men like him age in 2 ways, slowly in the bones, suddenly in the eyes. And in that photo, his eyes looked haunted, not by guilt, by something worse, the memory of truth returning. I had once believed he was unbreakable, a wall of iron wrapped in doctrine. I was wrong. Flesh wears discipline like a mask. Remove the mask, and you may find ash beneath. My mind drifted back to the first time I met him. I was 23, fresh from commissioning, full of rules and righteousness. He was already legendary. Colonel Nathaniel Branson, 3 tours, 2 shattered aircraft, the kind of officer who never raised his voice because he had no need to repeat himself. He inspected every line with silence sharper than any reprimand. The younger pilots feared him. I respected him in the way a recruit respects a storm. You do not love it, you learn how to stand in it. He never called me Keller, he called me Lieutenant. It was not cold, it was formal. Beneath it, I sensed a strange, distant faith. He once told me that precision is not a skill, it is a vow. I lived by that. For years, I would have followed him into hell. In a way, I did. Operation Black River. The words still taste like iron. It was meant to be a simple extraction. A convoy pinned in a ravine outside Kandahar. Hostile positions on both ridges. No ground support available. Air support only. We launched at dusk. I remember the light turning copper, shadows stretching across the tarmac like warnings. My call sign, Ghost Falcon, came from a ground unit that claimed I appeared out of nowhere. I never embraced it. Names like that become cages. You cannot live up to a myth. But that night, myth was the only currency we had. The convoy was under fire. Roads blocked. I coordinated the strike runs. Branson monitored the feed from the command bunker. I trusted his timing. He trusted my eyes. War is made of seconds. Too fast and you miss the shot. Too slow and men die with your name in their last breath. I called the coordinates. Clear the north ridge. Pilot confirmed. Gun run inbound. But something was off. A shimmer in the infrared. A heat signature too close to the convoy. I halted the strike, checked again. Static, sandstorm interference. I switched channels, heard a voice, faint, broken, Lieutenant Baker. One of ours, disoriented, crawling, off target, wrong place. Wrong time. If we hit that ridge, we would kill him. I issued a hold. Branson overrode. He had intel we did not. Satellite confirmed hostile artillery. Delay risked the convoy. I responded with a challenge. Sir, I need 30 seconds, just 30 to get Baker clear. He paused. I remember the weight of that silence. It could have gone either way. Then he said, do it. Move. We held fire. The gunship circled. I patched to ground. Baker, this is Ghost Falcon. Move east. 3 meters. Now he did not respond. I repeated, nothing. Then I heard it, a single breath, a grunt. He dragged himself. 1 meter, 2, 3. I marked his shift, cleared the strike. Fire inbound. The ridge erupted. Flames rolled through the valley. The convoy survived. Baker survived, but not everyone did. On the south ridge, a hidden post returned fire. We had delayed too long. 2 men from the convoy, caught in the crossfire, were lost. One was a private on his first deployment, the other a medic trying to shield him. Their families never knew the true sequence. Only that command-insisted protocol was followed. In the aftermath, Branson called me in. He did not sit. He stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back. He did not accuse. He never needed to. His silence was the verdict. Too dead. He said it without saying it. I stood at attention. They say war splits you into fragments. The part that fights, the part that mourns, the part that survives. But that day I learned of a 4th part, the part that accepts. Acceptance is not surrender, it is the burial of protest. I told him what happened. He listened, then he spoke. Keller, this cannot reach the record, not the hesitation, not the chatter. They died in combat. They did not die because we waited. I understood. He was not protecting himself. He was protecting the chain that holds everything. The problem is, chains weigh more when someone else must carry them. He handed me a report, a blank acknowledgement. Take responsibility for the delay. It will be sealed. No court, but it must be sealed. I thought of Baker, of his breath over the radio, of how close he had been to dying by our hand. I signed, not because I was guilty, but because someone had to carry the question. Sometimes leadership means bleeding in a room no one enters. That is what I told myself. For years, I believed it. Until now, until that photo, because there are 2 truths in war, the one you swear to protect, and the one that never stops staring back at you. I sat on the edge of the bed, dawn creeping through the blinds. My hands felt heavier than they had in years. People think silence is peace. It is not. Silence is orbit, circling what you cannot touch. I thought of Branson accepting his medal. They would call him a hero. They would tell his story on podiums. They would never know mine. And yet, somewhere buried beneath anger and memory, I wondered something I had never allowed myself to wonder. Does he remember I exist? Not as a rumor, not as a ghost, but as the soldier who made the call he could not. The sun broke through, turning the room gold. I stood. I had not worn dress blues in almost a decade. They were sealed in a box at the back of my closet. Beneath them, a single folded paper, my resignation, stained with the ink of a name I had tried to forget. I opened the box. The uniform still fits. The fabric smelled faintly of sand, of heat. Of vows, I traced the edges of the rank tabs, Major. I had refused promotion beyond that. Someone once asked why, because rank is only worth what you are willing to fall for. I pinned the insignia, not for recognition, for reckoning. Before leaving, I returned to the bar. The Marine was there, same table, same glass. I approached. He looked up, eyes sharp. "You going somewhere?" he asked. I nodded. "They are honoring someone," I said, "someone who left a few names behind." He grunted, "And do you plan to speak?" "No. I plan to be seen." He held my gaze. Then he lifted his fingers to his brow, a silent salute. For the first time in years, I returned it. My hand felt steady. Outside, the wind carried dust across the highway. The road ahead was long, but some roads, no matter how long, must be walked, not for glory, for truth. And if you have ever carried a truth so heavy it bent your spine, you will understand this much. I am not going to reclaim my name. I am going to correct the story. That is how Chapter 1 ends, not with closure, with opening fire. Heat rolled off the flight line like a living thing that first morning at Bagram. It climbed through my boots and into my bones until I could taste it at the back of my throat. The air smelled of JP8 and hot metal, a bitter perfume that would cling to my hair for months. I stepped down from the transport and the light cut clean across the tarmac, a white blade that carved everything into hard edges. Engines roared somewhere beyond the hangars. A forklift beeped in slow, patient intervals. Over it all hung the radio chatter, clipped and steady, the heartbeat of a base that never slept. A young airman led me along the perimeter road toward operations. His face was too open for a place like this. He pointed out safe paths with 2 fingers, pausing when convoys rolled by in plumes of tan dust. I kept pace, counted breaths. Let the rhythms of a war zone fold around me the way a swimmer learns to go still between waves. I had trained for this in rooms with fluorescent lights and whiteboards covered in acronyms. None of that preparation carried the weight that hummed beneath my feet now. This was not a theory. This was a city that woke and slept on the same second hand. Operations was a blockhouse of cement and shadow. Inside, the temperature dropped and the noise sharpened. Big screens glowed along one wall with feeds from drones, satellites, helmet cams that shook when someone ran. A map of the country made of pixels filled the far screen, threaded with roads that vanished into mountains. People moved with purpose and without wasted words. I felt it at once. This was a place where silence had a shape. Colonel Nathaniel Branson stood beside the far table, one hand resting lightly on the edge as if even furniture should hold posture around him. The photos in my packet had not captured how compact he was. Not small, concentrated. His eyes tracked everything without seeming to move. The moment he saw me, he nodded toward a chair. "No need to announce yourself." The order rode in at a glance, and I sat. He opened a thin folder. "Major Keller, Air Combat Command. Prior postings Ramstein and Shaw. Commendations noted." He closed the folder and looked up. "What matters is whether you can hold a picture in your head for longer than your fear." He was not asking. He was stating the price of admission. I met his gaze and answered with the only currency that counted here. "Yes, sir." He did not smile. "Good. We are short of people who mistake adrenaline for skill. You will coordinate close air support for ground teams north and east of here. That means you listen more than you talk. You keep your voice low and your mind high. When something breaks, your calm is the bridge the others will cross." He surveyed my face for the flinch that never came. Then he handed me a badge and a headset and pointed at a desk that looked like every other desk and also like a decision I would make 1,000 times. The first weeks passed in hours that were the same from the outside and savage in their differences from within. Dawn ran hot and flat over the airfield. Noon pressed the sky down until it felt a few inches above our heads. Night arrived without coolness, only with a deeper hum. I learned the names of the pilots I would never meet. I learned the shape of each voice on the ground, how Sergeant Alvarez clipped his consonants when someone was hurt nearby, how Specialist Ray read coordinates as if reciting a spell, how Captain North laughed once before he ran. Men and women became radio signatures in my inner ear. I held them all with the care I used when cradling glass. Branson walked the room like the weather. He did not micromanage. He did not hover. He altered the temperature by standing in a doorway or setting a hand on the back of a chair. He would pause behind me during a lull and ask a question without words. I learned to answer with a nod or a finger tapped twice on the desk. It surprised me how quickly I trusted him. He had the bearing of a man who had paid full price for his stripes. Once, after a long run of sorties that ended with a medevac lifting into a heat shimmer, he told me the quiet will be the worst part. I asked which was quiet because there were so many. He said the one after you cut transmission and your voice keeps speaking in your head anyway. The base taught its lessons fast. You ate when you could. You slept where you fell. You folded grief into a square small enough to slip into a pocket, and you carried it to the next shift. I kept a notebook of locational shorthand and the names of villages I could not spell. I kept a photo of an empty sky that I had taken the week before I deployed. Some nights I looked at that fraction of blue and reminded myself that there were places where radios did not call you by a name that was not yours. The first hint of Black River came as a rumor more than a briefing. A convoy had been harassed along a narrow ravine 2 hours southeast. No injuries. No confirmation of enemy positions. The road map showed that ravine as a thin thread of gray laid between two ridges like a seam just waiting to pop. Teams rotated in and out of that sector and came back with the same report, something from nowhere, a bite at the edges, no contact to chase. It was the sort of pattern that sits in a corner until the day someone turns on the light and sees the room is full of it. By late summer, the operations board had acquired a sticky note in Branson's handwriting that read simply "Watch the river." We adjusted flight paths to pass over the area more frequently. The feeds showed livestock, switchbacks, shadows where rock grew tall. The ravine held its counsel. Then one afternoon, the kind of call that starts like any other came in. Convoy northbound, 3 transports, 1 MRAP. Halfway through the tightest bend, the first vehicle hit something more sound than force. They kept rolling. 30 seconds later, the last vehicle lost a tire. They stopped to repair it. Small arms fire crackled from the west ridge, sporadic at first, then brighter. They called for air. I stepped into the chair as another controller stood up. Hands on the glass, eyes on the screens, voice steady. Ghost Falcon on station. Confirm grid, confirm friendlies, identify heat signatures. The pilots checked in, an A-10 holding at altitude, a gunship farther out. The forward observer on the ground sounded younger than I wanted him to be. He described an uphill position that made no sense. His words blurred at the edges. That could be adrenaline or interference. I asked him to breathe once before he spoke again. He did. The picture sharpened. We brought the A-10 lower. I requested a pass along the east ridge to test for muzzle flashes. The jet moved like a piece of sky had learned to listen. No visible fire. The ground still took hits from the west. I marked the suspected nest and framed a run. The pilot affirmed. Then my peripheral vision caught a tiny bloom in the thermal feed that did not fit the setting. A spark of human heat where there should have been none, too near our line of fire, halfway between ridges and far from cover. I zoomed. The shape shifted once and vanished under rock. My pulse did not change. I asked ground if any of ours were unaccounted for. The answer came back after a breath that lasted a lifetime. Lieutenant Baker had gone forward on foot to check a blind curve. He had not checked back. I froze the feed at the frame where the heat flared. I copied the coordinates and halted the run. The pilot asked for confirmation and I gave it. Hold, standby, standby. Branson appeared at my shoulder so quietly that I did not hear him walk up. He scanned the screens and then the feed I had locked. He did not speak. I marked a corridor and opened a channel to the ground. Baker, if you hear me, orient south by east 3 steps and drop flat. No answer. Too much static, I repeated. Nothing. The MRAP took rounds that pinged like thrown nails. 30 seconds was all I had, less maybe. The convoy was taking fire that might not kill them now, but would pin them long enough for something larger to walk down the hill. I asked the A-10 to hold the pattern. The pilot said Roger and held his breath too. I needed proof, not a hunch. Proof to justify telling a plane full of ammunition to wait while men on the ground ate the worst kind of seconds. I pulled the angle wider and found the boundary line where heat bled into rock. There, a ghost flicker. I resumed the narrow feed and spoke in a voice that felt older than I was. Baker, if you can hear me, kick once with your left heel. The thermal showed a pixel stutter that might have been dust and might have been a man choosing life by inches. I cleared the corridor and told him to move 3 feet east. A pause, then the heat signature slid like a bead of mercury into the shadow of stone. Branson touched the edge of the console, a small permission. I cleared the run. The A-10 rolled in and stitched the west ridge with fire that thundered up through the ravine. The first pass broke the position. The second scattered what remained. The convoy roared back to life. They moved forward with Baker still dragging himself as the MRAP limped behind. I did not breathe until the cameras showed a distance where there had been a trap. Then the South Ridge woke up with fury we had not accounted for. A hidden team lit the roadway and one of the transports shuddered to a halt. A medic ran. The feed trembled. I asked for a quick look beyond the bend and the drone obliged, and what I saw in that corner is something I still see when the house is quiet and the night lies heavy across the roof. The medic had thrown himself over the young private, whose mouth was open as if he had tried to shout the shell back into the gun. The angle was wrong. The timing was bad. The decision we had made to hold the first strike had given Baker a life. It had given the South Ridge enough seconds to find its breath. This is the arithmetic they never put on the posters. The rest of the fight blurs in memory. We put fire on the South Ridge too late to change the two facts that mattered. We covered the retreat. We guided the medevac. We watched that young private go still. We watched the medic stop seconds later as if patience had simply run out. At the end of the shift, I stood outside the operations building and the sky had no color at all. Just heat stacked on heat. A bird swooped low and vanished into glare. A crew chief somewhere laughed and the sound broke off as if ashamed to be heard. Branson called me in after the debrief. He closed the door and the room grew smaller. He rested both hands on the back of a chair and studied me as if I were a map that had not yet admitted all its roads. 2 men are dead. The sentence sat between us like weight. He was not accusing. He was moving pieces on a board he had held too long. I told him what I had seen. I told him about the heat flicker and the frozen frame and the pixel stutter that I had chosen to believe was a heel striking dust. He listened without interruption. When I finished, he nodded once. Then he said the thing that changed the rest of my life. The record cannot hold delay. The record must show continuous action. The families will not benefit from a debate about seconds. The unit will not survive another headline about mistakes. He slid a document across the table, a routine acknowledgement of procedural deviation. Sealed, no hearing, no public reprimand, only the formal note that I had deviated from timing. He added words I will not forget. You are the best controller I have. You will remain that, but not if the machine eats us alive. Sometimes silence saves lives. I do not know how long I stared at the paper. It was not the content that hollowed me out. It was the certainty in his eyes that what he asked was required to keep the whole from unraveling. I thought of Baker. I thought of the medic. I thought of the young private whose boots had scuffed dust into the same patterns I had seen on the screen and then vanished. I thought of the pilots who had trusted my voice and the ground team who had bled by my calls and all of the other days that had gone right for reasons no one had time to celebrate. I signed. The pen felt heavier when I set it down. Branson did not thank me. He did not need to. He simply placed his hand flat on the paper for a second, lifted it, and told me to take 24 hours off the schedule. I did not take them. I returned to the chair that night and worked a cargo escort in silence so complete I could hear my own breathing beneath the static. I went back to my bunk at dawn and scrubbed my hands until they ached and the smell of fuel and cordite retreated a little. Word of Black River spread along the lines the way stories do when no one is allowed to tell them straight. Some said the hold had saved a man and cost 2. Some said it had saved an entire convoy that would have been hit regardless. Most said nothing because they understood that certain equations are not meant for public math. The official report carried the names of the fallen and the language that folds pain into honor. It carried my acknowledgement in a sealed appendix that I was not allowed to read again. For a few weeks after, Branson spoke to me as if nothing had changed. He paused at my station. He asked for updates with the same crisp cadence. There was even a moment when he said good work after a clean extraction that threaded a needle no one else had seen. I thought perhaps the paper would vanish into archive and the weight in my chest would learn to stay put. Then the external review arrived from a desk far away. It asked why a recognized call sign had been associated with a delay in service. It asked whether protocols had been rehearsed. It asked in the tone of people who have never had to choose among imperfect options. The decision came down with the efficiency of a stamp. I would no longer serve as a controller. Reassignment pending. Status provisional under Article 92. No court, no debate. Just the mark that follows you into rooms long after your name has stopped being spoken. On my last day at Bagram, Branson did not meet my eyes. He stood at the edge of the operations floor, hands clasped behind his back, and nodded once when I turned in my badge. I waited for a fraction to stretch so long it might become something like an apology. It did not. I walked out into the heat with my duffel against my shoulder and the sound of engines taking off into a sky that did not know or care who I was. Years would pass before I understood what I signed away in that room. Not only rank, not only the role, I signed away a voice. I chose to keep silent because I believed the chain needed to hold. I told myself that families deserved simplicity and grief, not a transcript of seconds. Maybe I was right, maybe I was wrong, maybe those two truths can sit in the same chair and not speak to each other. If this chapter leaves a mark on you, let it be this. Some names go missing not because they failed, but because they stood in a place where failure and mercy touched and someone had to stand there until the rest got through. If stories like this matter to you, tap like and subscribe to Military Revenge so more quiet soldiers can be heard. I will carry you deeper in the next part. The ravine holds more than rock. It holds the price of loyalty and the first crack in a faith I thought could not break. I learned the quiet habits of a small American town faster than I expected. Mornings belonged to the bread truck and the newspaper man. Afternoons to the kids who cut across the lot with baseball gloves and sticky hands. Nights to the same few souls who never slept well, who showed up for coffee when the news anchors were still smoothing their suits. I kept extra mugs on a low shelf where anyone could reach without asking. People talk more when their hand is already on the thing they need. Somewhere along the way, the bar became a way station for veterans who did not want to be called veterans. They wandered in like stray dogs and left with a piece of themselves folded back into place, not because I offered advice. I did not. Advice is loud. What I offered was a chair near the back, a lamp with a warm bulb, and a space where no one demanded a story on cue. A man with bad knees knew he could sit and stretch his leg without apology. A woman who had lost a friend knew she could trace the rim of her cup until the tremor settled. Sometimes I added a splash of cream without asking. Sometimes I left the coffee black. It was not therapy, it was shelter. I learned the names slowly and only when they wanted to be known. A former medic who worked nights at the feed store. A crew chief who rebuilt lawn mowers in his garage because mechanical mercy is the only kind he trusted. A girl barely 20 who had come home from basic with a stress fracture and a broken sense of place. They found me by rumor at first. Someone would say there is a woman at the bar who understands the quiet parts. She will not ask for your papers. She will fill the cup when you nod. That was all. It was enough. There are moments when the past walks in without a sound and sits down across from you. I was wiping the counter one Tuesday when a man stepped through the door and the room altered by a degree only I felt. He moved carefully as if his bones had memorized blast waves and did not want to startle the air. His hair had grown back in wrong directions where a surgeon had shaved it. His eyes were pale from time indoors. He took the corner stool and set his hands flat, palms down. The way a soldier does when he wants the world to know he is not reaching for anything. He ordered coffee. No brand names, no cube of sugar, just the word and a nod. I poured. He lifted the cup and held it beneath his nose as if the steam could carry him out of a memory. His mouth quirked once. He did not smile exactly. More like a signal had passed between parts of him that did not often speak. He said his name in a soft voice. Daniel Miles. Most called him Danner. He did not ask for mine. He did not need to. People who have been under fire learn to recognize each other by the way they take a breath. He thanked me without looking up, and I said he was welcome. Then we left it there. Danner returned on Thursdays for no reason I could see. He never stayed long. He always left a crumpled bill beneath the coaster and a napkin folded into a square with a crease sharp enough to cut. The second week he reached into his jacket and took out a small pouch that jingled. He set it on the bar. I slid it back with 2 fingers. He nodded. He was not trying to pay a debt. He was trying to say he remembered something that mattered. On his fourth visit, he paused at the door on his way out and lifted 2 fingers to his brow in a small salute. I felt the air change in my chest, not a rush, a steadying. He never said Black River. I never said Ghost Falcon. That was our truce. Over time, I learned that he worked odd jobs and sent half his money to a woman who had been married to a man I once watched die in a camera feed. He kept a photo of a road that looked like any other road until you saw the ridges that hid teeth. He ran before the sun and gripped railings with hands that remembered carrying someone heavier than he was. He listened when the younger veterans asked how to sleep. He told them the truth. You do not the old way. You invent a new way and pretend it is sleep until your body gives up arguing. There is a point after war when the world begins to treat you like a person again. It is both a kindness and a lie. The manager at the grocery store calls you Han. The neighbor waves from the mailbox. Someone at the bank says, "Thank you for your service," and you nod because that is easier than explaining that service is not a package delivered door to door. I tried for a while to belong to the days the way other people do. I went to the farmer's market on Saturdays and bought tomatoes I never ate. I stood in line at the DMV and filled out a form that asked for previous occupations, and I wrote operations specialist because the truth would only raise questions. I learned to mend the hem on my one good shirt. The thread was navy blue and too thick, and I stitched it anyway. Helping others helped me, or at least hid me. When a vet needed a ride to the clinic, I drove. When a family could not figure out the forms for benefits, I sat with them until the boxes were filled. I kept a list of phone numbers on a card in my wallet: hospital social worker, night shift counselor, a woman at the county office who knew how to push a folder into the right hands without making a scene. I did not write my own name on that card. Some people need a lifeline. Some people are the lifeline. The rope holds because it does not ask for one. I spoke little of Bagram. If someone pressed, I moved the conversation back to them. People want to tell their story into a calm face. It is a way to measure whether the floor will hold. Yet there were nights when the weight of the sealed report rose in me like a tide. I would lock up and clean after close and stand with my palms flat on the wood, watching the neon sign paint the empty room in red and white. The mind plays the same 5 seconds again and again, searching for a door that is not there. I would remember the young private and the medic and the way the thermal feed blurred when a body stopped. Loyalty is not a word the body understands. The body understands habit and heat and the satisfaction of a checklist marked complete. My habit was silence. It had been my job. Keep the frequency clear. Keep the picture steady. Speak only what moves people out of the kill zone. After Bagram, I extended that habit to everything. It kept me upright. It also kept me alone. Months turned into years in a way that felt both slow and ruthless. At some point, I stopped counting. Then the world decided to remind me. The message with Branson's photo arrived. The Wyoming area code belonged to someone who would not sign a name. The note said he would receive the Medal of Honor at a ceremony open to the public. Black tie welcome. Dress uniform optional. The words made my mouth taste like metal. I set the phone down and walked out back to the small patch of gravel behind the bar where deliveries came. The sky was white and empty. The dumpsters hummed with flies. I thought about the phrase we use when we pin medals to a chest for conspicuous gallantry. I said the words to myself without sound and found I could not finish the sentence. Gallantry is a shape cut from a larger piece of cloth. The rest gets swept into a bin and shipped somewhere far away. Sometimes that bin is a person. I did not reply to the message. I tried to forget it. The next morning, the mail brought a heavyweight envelope with a seal. The letter inside was polite in the way official letters try to be. It invited me to attend as a former member of Air Combat Command who had served in theater during the time frame in question. It listed an auditorium and a date and a time, and suggested that stories of shared sacrifice strengthen the bond between service and nation. Near the bottom, in a line that felt like a pebble in a shoe, was a sentence that read that witnesses and participants are welcome to pay respects after the ceremony in a private room. I held the letter until my fingers left faint shadows on the paper. The phrase witnesses and participants was a net cast wide on purpose. It could hold anyone. It could hold me. It could be a trick of a staffer who did not even know my name, or it could be Branson reaching in the only way he knew how, not with apology, with invitation. Come stand in this light and let the past stand with you. The thought made my stomach go cold. I folded the letter once and slid it back into the envelope. That evening Danner came in early and sat without speaking. He watched the door as if expecting a storm. When I brought his coffee, he tilted his head toward the television mounted near the ceiling. The news ticker crawled past with the ceremony announced among other headlines. He did not look at me. He did not need to. He said that sometimes people survive by holding a version of the truth that is just light enough to carry. Then he added that some days the truth grows too heavy to ignore. I asked him how he lived with it. He said he did not. He lived beside it, side by side like neighbors who share a fence and nod when they take out the trash. He said a time would come when both would meet at the gate. I asked what he would do then. He smiled without humor and said he would bring coffee. 2 cups. One for each side. He stood and left, and the bell over the door made a thin sound that cut me down the middle. In the week before the ceremony, the town felt tilted. The newspaper ran a piece about Branson that made him sound like an iron pillar that had willed itself into human form. The VFW hall put out a call for volunteers and hung a blue banner so large it covered the old crack in the wall no one ever fixed. A woman who ran the bakery asked if I could take a tray of cookies to the reception because no one had hands free. I said yes, because that is what you do when a town builds a stage. You carry something heavy and you place it carefully where it belongs. At night, I lay awake and reviewed the angles of the past the way you would review a flight plan you know by heart. There was a version of the story where I stayed home and let the television tell it for me. There was a version where I arrived and sat in the back and slipped out before any hand could find my arm. There was a version where I stood and spoke, and in doing so broke the chain I had once chosen to protect. None of those felt right. I did not want a fight. I wanted a reckoning that did not require blood. I wanted to look into the eyes of the man who had taught me that precision is a vow and see whether he still believed it. The night before the event, I took my uniform from the box again and laid it on the bed. The fabric looked tired but held its line. I pressed a shirt and polished a pair of shoes that had not seen light in years. Then I put all of it back. I would not wear the past like a costume. I found a dark dress that fit my shoulders and a jacket with a pocket deep enough for the invitation. I pinned a small silver wing inside the lapel where only I would feel its weight. I slept 2 hours, dreamless. Morning arrived like a command. I opened the bar early for the old Marine and the medic from the feed store. They came without asking why and sat a while and watched the clock the way soldiers do when the hour matters more than the minute. When I locked up, Danner was waiting by his truck across the street. He lifted a paper cup and then set it on his hood for me. It was black, no lid, heat rising from it like a promise. He did not speak. He did not have to. We both understood the terms. He would not walk through those doors with me. This part was mine. The auditorium lived inside a building that smelled of carpet cleaner and pride. People moved in careful lines. Polite voices guided them to seats that had been assigned by someone who understood the choreography of honor. Gold cords hung from the stage. A flag stood in a bracket with the seriousness of a judge. Photographers checked angles and then pretended they would not intrude. I found a place near the aisle 3 rows from the back. I wanted a path if I needed one. I watched the crowd instead of the stage. A man with a chest full of ribbons whispered into his wife's hair. A teenage boy traced the outline of a patch on his father's sleeve. An old sergeant sat very straight with his cane laid across his thighs like a rifle at rest. When the lights dimmed, the room inhaled as one. The citations took time. They always do. Names were read with care. Stories were shaped into the kind of narratives that can be swallowed without choking. Then they brought out Branson. He walked more slowly than the last time I saw him, but he walked without help. His shoulders held their angle. His jaw still set when he concentrated. The applause rolled up the walls and pooled in the rafters. He waited for it to recede. Then he spoke about service and about duty and about the way the best things we do are often the things no one will ever know we did. I felt the line of my mouth go tight. There are sentences that cut both ways. I could not tell if he meant them to. He told a brief version of Black River without naming it. He said a convoy came home because a team made decisions in a narrow window and lived with those decisions afterward. He He said leadership is choosing which pain you can bear. He said sometimes the bravest voice in a room is the one that says hold. His eyes moved over the audience then, and for 1/2 second they stopped near the back on the left where a woman in a dark jacket sat with her hands folded. He did not blink. I could not breathe. After the presentation, a staffer in a suit announced that participants and witnesses could gather in a smaller room for refreshments. People stood in clusters, the way people do when they are not sure if they should hold their grief or let it free. I considered leaving, then I felt my feet move. The private room was warmer than it should have been. The coffee was too weak. The cookies were the ones from the bakery. I carried the tray to the table and set it down. An aide thanked me with the kind of smile people wear when they want to be kind to a stranger who has done something useful. I turned and saw Branson across the room speaking to a reporter. He looked beyond the reporter and saw me. He did not startle. He did not pretend he had not. He finished his sentence, handed off his cup, and crossed the room with the deliberate pace of a man who will not be hurried again. Up close the years were etched where the cap used to hide them. His eyes were the same, precise, tired, alive. He stopped a step away and inclined his head. He said that he remembered a voice that could hold a picture long enough to carry a dozen people across. He said he had wondered for a long time if that voice still spoke. It took me a second to find my own. I said that it never stopped. It only changed frequency. For a breath we stood like that, not enemies, not friends, two people who had carried the same weight in different ways and arrived in the same room to see if it had crushed the other. He said that there were things a record cannot hold without breaking. He said that he had asked too much of me and that the asking had grown heavier over time. He said that he had learned there are forms of bravery that do not fit on a ribbon. I told him the truth. I said I had signed because I believed the chain needed to hold. I said 2 men had died and that the arithmetic of seconds does not absolve the living of anything. I said I had tried to be worthy of the silence. He looked like a man standing at a border between 2 countries that speak almost the same language and finally finding the right word to cross. He did not apologize. That would have been easy. He did something harder. He asked me to take a cup of coffee with him and stand by the window where the light was good. He asked me to tell him the parts of Black River that he had not allowed himself to keep. I started with the smell, with the way the heat felt like a hand at the base of the skull, with the squeal a radio makes when the sun sits wrong on a dish. I told him about Baker and the pixel that stuttered and the decision that felt like stepping out over a drop and finding air that held a second longer than it should have. He listened. The room went on around us. Someone laughed too loudly near the door. Someone cried into a napkin. A photographer turned and turned back. We occupied a small circle of time that finally matched the outline of the one we had left behind in the ravine. When the coffee cooled, he said that a ceremony is a way of letting strangers practice gratitude safely. He said it does not always reach the ones it should. I said that sometimes gratitude arrives later in a different form. He asked what form I meant. I told him I did not know yet. Then I felt a presence behind me and turned. Danner stood near the table with the simple food. He must have slipped in with a group. He carried 2 cups and looked like a man who had run too far in a dream and woken in the wrong room. He saw me and paused. Then he lifted 1 cup a fraction as if to ask permission. I nodded. He walked over, set a cup in front of Branson and 1 in front of me. He said that he had a habit of bringing coffee when words might fail. Branson asked his name in the formal way officers still use even when no one wears a uniform. Danner said it and added that sometimes a life owes a life. Then he stepped back to the edge of the circle and waited without expectation. Branson looked from him to me and something in his face eased. A knot pulled loose by a hand that did not know it had the strength. He lifted his cup. I lifted mine. Danner touched his to the air between us and did not drink. The gesture was small. It felt like a bridge laid plank by plank over a river that had waited too long. There is a moment before a crowd chooses. You can feel it. The way air changes before a storm. The way a field goes still before a herd moves. I felt it then, fragile and enormous. The story would keep unfolding. The stage was not finished. Someone would stand soon in a different room on a different day and make a choice that would echo. For now, the choice was simple. Keep walking. Keep telling the part you never told. Keep faith with the silence by using it to honor the truth rather than hide it. If this journey matters to you, tap like and subscribe to Military Revenge so more of these quiet reckonings can find daylight. The next step is not spectacle. It is a room that will hold its breath while a single person stands, and then another, and then the rest. They had set the chairs in perfect rows, polished floors reflecting the stage lights as if honor itself required symmetry. Programs were neatly placed on every seat with names printed in bold, citations summarized into paragraphs that fit neatly between margins. My name was nowhere among them. That was by design. I arrived early, before the crowd gathered, and stood along the far wall where the light did not quite reach. It was the same place I had stood 100 times before, some briefing room, some command tent present but uncounted. Old habits do not fade, they calcify. Men and women filed and dressed in navy and charcoal, some with ribbons spread across their chests like maps of old campaigns, others in simple jackets holding a different kind of pride. There were families, 2 sons wearing their father's dog tags, wives with tissue already in hand. Mothers gripping folded programs like transcripts of something they feared to forget. No one looked twice at me. A woman in a dark coat, hands behind her back, eyes lowered, not strange enough to be questioned, not important enough to be greeted. That was how I preferred it. From where I stood, I could see the podium, the flag, the empty chair reserved at center stage. I remembered another chair once in a bunker at Bagram, where Branson sat while I gave my last briefing before they removed my access. That memory flickered like static, his hand pressed to his temple, his silence a verdict. It echoed under fluorescent lights, the same ones that now hummed above this polished hall. I let the memory pass. This was not a battlefield, and yet in a way it was. I noticed Captain Harris before he noticed me. He moved like someone who had once marched and had never unlearned it. His hair, now streaked with gray, was trimmed too close for a civilian. The line of his jaw held a question he had carried too long. He took a seat near the front, glanced around the room, and for an instant his eyes passed over me, curious, as if a shadow had stirred. But the brain protects itself. He looked away. A low hush rippled when they announced guests of honor. Then he entered, Colonel Nathaniel Branson. Age had taken something from his gait, but not his presence. He walked with his chin lifted, shoulders squared against time itself, as if the years could slow him but never bend him. Applause rose, respectful and sustained. People stood, some wiped their eyes. He nodded once, twice, the practiced humility of a man accustomed to ceremony. I watched him without moving. It had been over a decade since I last saw him. The air between us still held the shape of that final order. Sometimes silence saves lives. He took the podium. For a moment, only the soft whir of cameras and the flutter of a flag broke the quiet. Then Branson rested his hands on either side of the lectern and spoke in that measured cadence I once built decisions upon. War, he began, has a way of forging men and women into something harder than they ever imagined. It breaks some, it tempers others, but it also exposes the weak, those who cannot live with the weight of their own orders. I felt the words strike, not like a bullet, but like a hammer tapping the same bruise. Exposes the weak. The phrase floated. Deliberate, a shard waiting to cut. He knew I was here, he had to. Or perhaps he spoke to someone else entirely. That uncertainty was its own wound. A few heads nodded, agreeing. A widow dabbed her eyes. A young officer straightened, absorbing the lesson. I stood unmoving, my breath steady, though every instinct I carried since Bagram whispered to step back, to exit quietly before ghosts were named. But then something subtle shifted. Captain Harris rose to his feet. The movement was small, respectful, but carried the gravity of rank given, not worn. He cleared his throat once. "Sir," he said, voice carrying just enough to reach the stage, "with all due respect, the one you called weak is the reason my team made it home. Every last one of us." Branson did not answer. The audience turned, eyes tracing the room in search of the subject. Some faces puzzled, uncomprehending. A ripple of uncertainty moved through the hall like a breeze before thunder. Harris continued, gaze unwavering. "We never saw her face. We didn't need to. We heard her, calm, precise. While the ridge burned around us, she held the line." His jaw trembled once, then locked again. She wasn't weak. She was the last voice standing. The room stilled. Someone whispered, "Who?" Another asked, "What is he talking about?" Branson's fingers curled once against the wood. A microphone caught the softest exhale. I felt my feet shift, the way they used to before stepping onto a tarmac under fire. But I didn't move. I would not walk out, not this time. Harris did not point. He did not name. He simply turned his head. His eyes found me at last. Recognition is not always loud. Sometimes it flickers like a hallway light, unsure whether to stay on, but when it arrives, it commands. Branson followed his gaze. For a long, impossible second, he stared at me as if he were seeing a ghost he once ordered to disappear. No surprise crossed his face. No guilt, only a long-hidden exhaustion, the kind that comes when a man has lived too long with a sentence unfinished. Time folded. Bagram, the sealed report. The chair I stood behind when he signed my name out of the record. The night sky cracking with fire as I held a frequency alone. And now this room. Branson stepped back from the podium. He did not speak. He reached up, adjusted his collar with a trembling thumb, and squared his shoulders, not with ceremony but resolve. Then he raised his hand, 2 fingers, brow touched, a salute, imperfect, left-handed. Every regulation I had ever memorized shattered in that single breach. A colonel does not salute like that to a civilian. A superior does not salute first, but this wasn't regulation. This was recognition. A murmur swept through the audience. People straightened. Soldiers, active, retired, broken, forgotten, looked to one another, saw his hand, understood, and one by one they rose, not for him now, for me. The weak, he had said, the ones who couldn't live with orders. But here they were, living witnesses, standing because someone had once held a sky for them when it threatened to fall. My eyes burned, not with tears, but with the sudden, unbearable clarity of being seen after so long unseen. I did not step forward. I did not lower my gaze. I raised my hand, slow, measured, just as he taught me. The salute held like a final vow between us, neither victory nor absolution, only truth. When it fell, the room stayed silent. No applause, no cheers, only the echo of something heavier than sound. A history corrected not in records, but in posture. If you've ever carried a truth no metal could bear, you'll understand what happened in that hall. No one said Ghost Falcon. No one had to. Some names live louder in silence. The silence after the salute felt like a held breath that belonged to the whole room. You could hear fabric settle. You could hear a chair leg shift on wood and then stop. No one spoke. There are moments when language knows it will only make things smaller. This was one of them. I lowered my hand. The air tasted like dust and coffee gone cold. I drew a slow breath because breathing is what a body understands when the mind goes bright with feeling. Branson stood at the podium with his hand still lifted halfway, as if the gesture had not yet remembered how to end. His face looked carved, not proud and not ashamed, only stripped down to its frame. I watched the tremor in his fingers settle. He was older than the man I had served under, but in that second I saw the one I knew, the spine that refused to bow, the eyes that counted costs faster than anyone else could. The man and the burden stood together on that stage like 2 old enemies who had learned to share a chair. People sat again by instinct and then stood once more by choice, uncertain which posture would honor what they had witnessed. The master of ceremonies glanced at a list that suddenly felt ridiculous. A reporter lowered a camera. A bugler near the back wiped his eyes with the heel of his hand and pretended to polish brass. In the far corner, a child asked a question in a whisper, and a mother put a hand on a small shoulder without looking away from the front. I felt movement on my left. Captain Harris walked toward the aisle in 3 steady steps and stopped where he could see both the stage and me. He did not speak. He set his feet shoulder-width apart the way you do when you mean to stand a while. He was not acting as a hero. He was acting as a witness. There is a difference. And rooms like this can feel it. My pulse was even now. The first wave of heat had cooled. I looked at the exit and then at the man on the stage and then at Harris and then down at my hands. I imagined how the scene would read to someone without our history. A woman in a dark jacket standing where the light fails. A decorated officer at a podium. A sentence about war and weakness floating between them. An older captain drawing a line in the air with his body. You could write 1,000 headlines and miss the only story that mattered, which was a simple one. Someone had chosen to carry silence for a long time because she believed it might save more than it cost. Someone else had let her. The master of ceremonies tried to recover the program. He thanked the audience. He spoke of gratitude and community. He gestured at a door to the reception room where cookies and soft drinks waited. People moved in a gentle shuffle and then slowed again, glancing toward me and away as if they were afraid to look directly at a star. I stayed put. I was not here for refreshments or small talk. I was here to test if the truth could stand in daylight without breaking the furniture. Branson left the podium without command. No aides flanked him. No rope opened. He walked down the steps as if he had made a decision and wanted to reach it sooner. When he reached the floor, he turned not toward the crowd, but toward the side aisle where the wall met the dark. He did not hurry. He did not invite applause. He simply crossed the distance that had grown between us over a decade of separate weather. When he stopped a few feet away, I could see the small scars shaving leaves on his cheek where razors had missed under field conditions once upon a time. His ribbons caught a shard of overhead light and threw a shard back. He looked at me and did not look away. He said one sentence. He said that some orders never end. The voice was low and used to being obeyed. It was also tired in a way I had not heard before. I answered in kind. I said that some truths never stop echoing. For a beat neither of us breathed. Then a sound moved behind me like boots scuffing gently to announce presence. I did not turn. I knew who it was. Danner never barged and never vanished. He moved like a man who had learned that life can be startled if you enter it too quickly. He took a place one step behind my left shoulder and to the side. Just inside my blind spot. It was not protection. It was respect. He was telling both of us that this conversation did not belong only to the past. Branson saw him and took that in with one brief nod. He said he had asked himself a question every day for years. Did we do right? It was not a plea and not a defense. It sounded like a man laying a weapon on a table and waiting to see whether the other person would pick it up. I told him the only answer I could live with. I said we did what we did and then we lived with it. Right and wrong are blunt words for work done in seconds where you can hardly see the shape of your own hands. 2 men died. 1 lived who would not have lived. A convoy moved forward when it should have been a line of names on a wall. We did not get to choose a clean line. We got to stand in a messy one and make it hold. He took that in and closed his eyes a fraction the way old soldiers do when the news is neither good nor bad, just exact. He said he had used the word weak and knew it would land somewhere hard. I told him that I understood what he had meant and that I also understood what the room had heard. He had been speaking to the part of every soldier that wants to avoid the mirror at dawn. I had heard something else because I am a person with a history shaped by that word. Sometimes a single sentence contains 2 meanings and both are true. He looked down at his own hand, the one that had lifted in a left-handed salute. A small smile cut the lines around his mouth. He said that in the end the hand that works is the hand you use. We both knew what that meant without saying it. We salute with what we have. People were moving now into the side room. The noise rose a little, then steadied at a level where this small island of quiet could still exist. Harris drifted closer, but stayed far enough away that he could be called a bystander if anyone asked. He did not want to intrude. He wanted to be near enough to catch a word if it fell. I asked Branson if he slept. He said less than he used to, more than he deserves. I did not correct him. Guilt is a scale that always reads heavy. He asked if I regretted signing. I said I regret the need and I accept the choice. He said that he should have stood years ago and did not. I said that he stood now and that sometimes timing is a wound and sometimes it is mercy. He said he did not know which this was. I told him that the room would decide and that the room had just told us. We stood like that while the space around us filled with ordinary acts. A girl asked a man with a prosthetic where he got his baseball cap, and the man told her that a friend sent it from overseas. A reporter tried to make the salute into a headline and could not find a word that did not ruin it. The bugler finished his polishing and held the instrument the way a father holds a sleeping child. Nothing about this felt like revenge. It felt like accounting. Branson asked if I would walk with him to the window. We did. The glass looked out over the parking lot and a square of bright sky with a few gulls cutting through it, even though we were far from open water. He said he had a letter he had never sent. It said that he believed the choice we made at the Ridge bought 1 life at the price of 2 and that he would wear that arithmetic like a chain. He said he never sent it because a letter like that is a selfish gift. It asks for absolution just by existing. I told him he had done the right thing by not sending it and that he was doing the right thing by telling me now. He asked what I needed. I said I needed nothing from him. I needed only to say that I saw him. Not the ribbon and not the podium and not the quotations that would appear in the morning paper. I saw the man who held 1,000 pictures that no one would ever hang on a wall. He swallowed and looked down once more. The metals shone and then dulled as a cloud crossed the sun. Danner spoke then for the first time since he had taken his place near me. He said that he had heard my voice in a ravine and that he had been waiting a long time to say thank you in a room where the floor did not shake. He did not tell a story. He did not make it about him. He just placed the word thank you in the space between us and backed away half a step so it could sit there without tipping the table. Branson turned to him and nodded. He said that he remembered a radio log that showed a heartbeat where a call sign should have ended and that maybe that was enough. He did not ask Danner for details. He did not make a show of gratitude. He let the moment keep its size. A woman approached with 2 plastic cups of lemonade and a smile meant for a battle she could not see. She asked if we needed anything. We said no. She went away and her perfume left a small sweet trail that reminded me of a field hospital where a nurse had once lent me a pen to sign a report and told me to keep it because pens get lost in places where people should not be doing paperwork. I wondered where she was now. I wondered if she still kept extra pens in a pocket for strangers who needed to sign something they would never forget. Branson said that he had one more thing. He said that he could request an addendum to a citation that would mention unnamed coordination that saved lives. He said it would not put my name on any page, but it would put a truth in the official air. I did not think long. I said that a line like that might help a future officer hold their ground when seconds try to push them around. I said that if he could do it without turning it into a headline, he should. He said he could, and then he said he would. Harris came close enough now to stand with us. He asked if we needed a minute, and I told him we had already taken it. He laughed once short, the way soldiers laugh when they mean to break a spell without breaking respect. He said that he had a picture he kept in a desk drawer of men standing in a row at dawn with their helmets under their arms, and that today he would put a second picture next to it even though there was no camera for what he saw. I told him that sounded right. We did not shake hands. We did not embrace. We did not trade contact numbers or make plans. There are meetings that exist so that the people in them can go back to their lives with a piece put down at last. This was that. I told Branson I would be leaving now. He inclined his head and stepped aside. He did not try to hold me with words or eyes. He knew the value of a straight path. I turned and began to walk the length of the hall. The carpet changed to tile, and my footsteps made a soft sound that felt like a heartbeat calming after a hard run. Around me, clusters of people spoke in low tones, as if they had all agreed at once to respect a perimeter they could not see. I passed the bugler, and he lifted his instrument a fraction in a gesture that might have been a salute if it had belonged to his hand, and not to the thing he carried. I passed the bakery tray with half the cookies gone and a smear of frosting that looked like a map of a place I once knew. I passed a bulletin board with a flyer about a community food drive, and another about free legal help for veterans, and one about a baseball game down at the field where the grass always looks greener than it should. Life was going on in a world that had just shifted by a degree but not cracked. That felt important. Near the door, I felt more than heard Danner fall in behind me again, 2 steps back and to the side. He did not touch me. He did not speak. He simply walked the distance a friend walks when there is no danger, only the echo of old danger. At the threshold, I stopped. The sunlight lay across the floor like a blade. The parking lot beyond was full of cars that would carry people back to houses where dinner waited and bills waited and the slow work of ordinary survival waited. I turned. Branson stood by the window, his profile sharp against the bright beyond the glass. He was not looking at me, not right then. He was looking at something only he could see, maybe a ridge, maybe a map. Maybe a room with a single chair and a piece of paper on a table. Harris was beside him. Danner stood behind me like a shadow with a heartbeat. The room was not mine and it was not his. It belonged to whoever could stand in it with the truth and not break the furniture. I lifted my chin a fraction and let my eyes meet his when he finally glanced my way. I did not smile. I did not cry. I gave him a small nod. It was not forgiveness. It was not judgment. It was the only sentence that made sense at the end of this long grammar. We were soldiers. Then I stepped into the sun. The heat rose off the pavement and the day smelled like hot rubber and cut grass. Somewhere a siren sang and then fell silent. I walked to my truck with my keys held loose the way you do when you are not afraid. I opened the door and paused with one knee inside the cab. I let the breath out all at once and felt the ground settle under me. In the side mirror, I could see the front doors of the hall swing open and a few people spill out laughing in that brittle way people laugh after being near something too large for words. I sat and put my hands on the wheel. The leather was warm. My palms fit it like they remembered a different kind of control. I thought of Black River and the corridor I had cleared for a man to crawl through. I thought of the way a choice can follow you across a decade and still be waiting by a window when you arrive. I thought of a left-handed salute that had bent a rule and set something right. I did not feel lighter. That is a lie people tell about closure. I felt truer. The difference is not small. Truer means the weight has the right name. On the ride back into town, I caught every green light. The radio was off. Traffic moved like a river that had been given clear banks. I did not hurry. At the last corner, a school bus stopped, and I waited while children with oversized packs clattered down the steps and ran toward a field where a coach tossed a ball underhand because there is no need to throw hard when the sun is shining and you are 8. One kid tripped and another reached a hand without thinking, and both of them laughed. I let the scene wash through me like a rinse. I pulled behind the bar and cut the engine. The delivery door looked the same as it always did. The paint was chipped. The handle stuck when it rained. Inside, the same clean glasses waited for a night that would bring the usual mix of stories and silences. I unlocked the door and stood in the cool dim and heard the quiet snap of electricity waking the new day. I set the invitation on the counter and smoothed it once and then put it under the register. Not as a trophy, as a record. I took a long breath and let it go. Then I made coffee. I brewed one pot strong and one a little lighter for the people who would pretend they did not need mercy today. I set 2 cups aside with lids. One marked with a small letter B I made with a pen, one with a small letter D. I did not plan to deliver them. I only wanted the act to exist. Sometimes that is enough. When the first customer pushed in the door, the bell made its usual thin sound. It did not sound like triumph. It sounded like duty done in a quiet key. The old Marine nodded from his corner without asking what had happened. The medic from the feed store rubbed his wrist and asked if the game would be on later. The girl with the stress fracture came in wearing a smile that looked honest for once. I poured and listened and did the math of small graces. If stories like this matter to you, you can help carry them. A click, a share, a line sent to someone who needs to hear that silence can be honored without being permanent. It is a small thing. It is not nothing. Before noon, a familiar truck rolled past slow and kept going. I knew Danner would circle the block and park out back like always. He would come in, set his palms flat on the bar, and let the steam rise into his face until the dark behind his eyes stepped a little farther away. When he lifted the cup, I would pretend not to see the scar near his hairline. He would pretend not to see the way I brace before a door swings hard. We would keep our truce. We would let the living be proof that the past failed to claim us. Later, when the lunch rush had done its small havoc and gone, I took a rag and cleaned the bar in slow loops until the wood gleamed. Outside, the flag at the post office hung still. A train in the distance called once and then again. I felt the shape of the salute settle inside me like a weight I could carry without leaning. I had not wanted a parade. I had not wanted a speech. I had wanted a room to stand and say with their bodies that they understood. I had received that. The metal would go in a case somewhere. The standing would live in bone. There are days that end a chapter without closing a book. As the afternoon light tilted across the floor, I understood that I had stepped from one room into another. The new room was not brighter. It was clearer. The lines were clean. The chairs were set. There was a place for me in it that did not depend on a program or a podium or a rank. When the evening crowd drifted in, someone asked what the special was. I said the same as always: strong coffee, a chair that will hold, a bar top that remembers the weight of hands. A place to set down which you cannot carry alone any farther. They smiled like they thought I was telling a joke. I smiled back like I had meant to. The night came on. Outside, the neon painted a red wing on the pavement. Inside, voices rose and fell, a tide that knew its limits. I moved among them with a rag and a quiet that had learned a new shape. If you are still with me, thank you. Hit like and subscribe to Military Revenge if you want more of these quiet reckonings to find their way into rooms where they can do some good. This is not an ending. It is a post, a marker. Tomorrow I will open the door and the bell will ring and someone will ask how strong the coffee is and I will say strong enough. We were soldiers. That is the whole sentence. The week after the ceremony folded into the town like a card slipped under a door. Nothing announced itself. The sky kept its pale blue. The train called across the fields the way it always did. The bell over my door rang thin and ordinary. People came for coffee and pie and the quiet that gathers in corners when a place remembers how to hold it. The world did not rearrange itself around one left-handed salute. It settled a little. That was enough. I woke earlier than usual and walked the block before opening. The air was still. Porch flags hung without a ripple. A dog barked twice and gave up. I thought about the room where 100 bodies had chosen to stand and how the silence afterward had felt like a church with no name. I did not replay the moment. Memory is not a trick I use to keep myself upright. I let the feeling pass through me like weather. Cool, brief, real. At the bar, I set the chairs straight and brewed 2 pots. One stout enough to brace a man with a long night behind him. One kinder to a woman who had been told for years that crying is a leak. I chalked the board with a small promise that the coffee was strong and the company steady. No one reads the chalk. They read the room. The room said you could be tired here without explanation. Danner came just after 7 and took his place without a sound. He set his palms on the wood and looked at the steam rising from his cup as if it could tell him what day it was. I topped him off when the level dropped and he nodded once in thanks. Neither of us said anything about the hall or the salute or the way his boots had sounded behind me when I turned toward the door. He spoke about a fence that needed mending behind a church and a man who had lost his hammer again. I told him that pane number 3 in the back door needed putty before the next rain. We left it there. Some kinds of grace travel best in work clothes. Late morning brought the old Marine and the medic from the feed store. They argued gently about which team would make the playoffs even though both knew the season was already decided. A girl from the high school stopped for a soda and asked if she could leave a flyer about a car wash to raise money for the band. I taped it where people would see it while they waited for change. Life did what it does when it is allowed to be simple. It wore its ordinary face and kept all the storms small and far away. 3 days passed, 4. On the 5th morning, the mail arrived in a canvas bag that thumped like a heartbeat against the back door. I carried it in and sorted the stack. Flyers. A bill with the kind of window envelope that makes you sigh before you open it. A note from a supplier apologizing for late lids. At the bottom lay a small box wrapped in heavy brown paper with a return address that slid a knife along my ribs. Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. The postmark was older by 2 weeks. I did not open it at once. I stood with the box in my hands and let the weight speak first. Not heavy, not light, a measured thing. The tape had been pressed smooth by patient fingers. The corners were neat. The handwriting knew how to fit letters into a space meant for numbers and did not mind the mismatch. I set the box on the counter and finished refilling the sugar jars because sugar runs low when people need it most. Then I washed my hands, then I broke the seal. Inside lay a single envelope and a smaller packet wrapped in tissue. The envelope held a letter written in a hand I had seen on too many orders and one report I can recall by touch in the dark. The lines were straight without a ruler. The ink had bled once where a pen paused too long. It began with my rank and my last name. It did not begin with apology. It began with the truth as one man had finally learned to carry it. Major Keller, I lied to protect my name. You stayed silent to protect your brothers. That is what makes you the better soldier. I salute you one last time. Call Branson. I read it once and the room narrowed to the space between my skin and the paper. The words did not tilt the ground. They did not lift the years. They stood as they were, exact, spare, heavy in the right places. I read it again and the lines grew more human. The loops on the G that had always been tight and exact. The way his S still looked like a path cut into frost. The man was in the hand. The hand was finally honest. I did not sit. I did not line. I stood there at the bar as if I were at parade rest in a place with no parade left. The door opened and a trucker stepped in for a to-go coffee, and I tucked the letter under the register with a movement so small a magician might have missed it. He asked for something strong, and I poured it. He asked if there would be pie later, and I told him there would be if the world stayed in one piece until 4. He laughed and left $1 more than the price and said, "Keep the change," in a voice that meant keep the peace if you can. I nodded and the bell rang and the door shut and the thin sound hung in the air a beat longer than usual. I took the letter back out and read it again because sometimes the weight of a thing changes as your hands learn it. I let the words rest under my palm. I laid my fingers along the bottom edge and did not fold it. I thought of the men whose names sit on walls where the sun hits every hour like a benediction. I thought of the room where we had stood without speaking. I thought of the boy in the ravine who had moved when asked and the medic who had not had time to step out of the way. The math did not change. The numbers arranged themselves in the same pattern, but the letter laid a thin sheet of mercy between them, not to excuse, to understand. The tissue packet held a ribbon, not a medal. A ribbon stripped from a bar and pressed flat. It was the small green stripe marked by thinner white that means a thing to those who know the code and nothing to those who do not. A note had been tucked around it. 2 words only, for you. I closed my eyes and felt the old air of 1,000 inspections when a bar sat straight or did not, and the way a shirt stiffened in heat and stayed stiff as if duty could be ironed into fabric. I set the ribbon beside the letter. An hour later, the phone on the wall rang, and the nurse at Walter Reed asked if she had reached the right place. I told her she had and gave my name. She spoke gently and said the colonel had passed 2 days after the parcel left his hand. He had asked that the hospital confirm when it arrived. I said the box had reached me intact. She asked if there was anything I needed. I said no and meant it. She thanked me for my service without making it sound like a line. I thanked her for hers. We hung up. I let the dial tone run a breath before I set the receiver down. News travels the way it wants to. By afternoon, the VFW had lowered a flag. By evening, the paper ran a brief that said the community mourned and that arrangements would be announced. The story said he had been a husband and a father and a commander and a volunteer coach. It did not say he had been a man who mailed a ribbon to a woman whose name had once been useful to remove from a room. That truth belonged to the people who needed it. Sometimes that is 2. Sometimes it is 1. I did not tell Danner. He would hear soon enough from the lips that always arrive ahead of the paper. He came at dusk and stood with his hand on the back of a chair and asked if the coffee was fresh. I told him it was. He looked at my face a second longer than usual and then looked away. He is a man who measures need and does not force it. He drank and stretched his sore knee and told me about a dog that had learned to open a gate with its teeth. I pictured the fence and the field and the sky all turned the same blue by the falling dark. I poured him another, and he left a napkin folded so clean along the edge that I could have balanced a coin on it. The letter stayed on the bar that night after I locked the door. I cleaned around it carefully, wiping rings and crumbs and the small grit that gathers when people find the courage to unclench. I turned the lights low, and the glass reflected my hands moving over wood. Somewhere down the block, a truck downshifted and slowed, and the drag of sound felt like an apology for something the driver had not done. I picked up the letter again, and this time I folded it once, not to hide it, to give it a spine. Sleep found me late and light. In the short stretch between midnight and morning, I dreamed that I was back in the bunker at Bagram, and the radios had fallen silent of their own accord, and the screens were off, and all that was left to hold was a blank space where a map should be. I woke with my hands curled like I was still holding the headset. The first sound I heard was a bird trying out a song it had nearly forgotten. I got up and put coffee on. When the light settled in the windows and the street took its first breath, I took a frame down from a back shelf. It was plain weathered wood that had once held a picture of a field and a sky. I removed the old print and wiped the glass with a cloth until there were no streaks left to catch the sun. I placed the letter inside so that the words sat centered and clear, and the crease that I had made lay like a calm horizon through the middle. I set the ribbon just below the last line, the green looking darker under glass. I closed the back and felt the small give of cardboard against the pins. I did not hang it right away. I carried it to 3 different spots and stood and watched it in each one. Over the register would make it a ledger. Near the door would make it a warning. Back by the photos of stock cars and fishing trips would make it a secret. None of those were right. I set the frame on the bar where a morning beam made a slow square and waited until the light slid over the words. The glass caught it and threw it back up onto the ceiling in a faint echo of wings. That is where it belonged, not trying to be seen, ready to be found. Business came as it always does. A rancher with dust lines in the creases of his hands. A woman who had driven all night from Abilene to see a sister who might not remember her. A kid with a cast and a haircut that said he had tried to do it himself. I filled orders and wiped counters and listened without collecting. Mid-afternoon, I wrapped a sandwich and walked it across to the widow who never remembered to eat on days when papers had to be signed. When I came back, Danner had closed the bar for me with a napkin like a flag. He does that when I step out. He is not trying to be noble. He is simply holding a door open the way one does when another person is carrying something with both hands. It was after sunset when the new mail came. An envelope this time, also with the Walter Reed stamp. A form letter expressed condolences to colleagues and offered a link for memorial donations. Tucked behind it was a copy of the program for a small service to be held in a chapel where the light is kind even in winter. The back page held a single line that I read twice to be sure it was what it was. The record includes acknowledgement of unnamed coordination that preserved lives during an operation in hostile terrain. I set the page beside the register. I did not need to smile. The mouth does as it likes. My hands knew what to do. They stilled. By the end of the week, the town had adjusted. People argued about weather again. A truck stalled at the light and 3 teens pushed it through the intersection while the driver steered and grinned. The clerk at the hardware store found my putty and threw in a brush because I had said pane 3 and she knew this building like a second cousin. The small currents of living carried us forward. I made small changes that no one would notice until they needed them. I put a list of numbers on the corkboard near the bathroom where a person can memorize a hotline without having to ask. I added a second light near the back table. I bought a stool with a soft seat for the old Marine whose hip had started to catch. I moved the television to a place where you had to turn to look at it. I set a jar on the shelf marked for coffee on the house and did not point to it. Strangers drop coins in when they can. The jar never empties. It never overflows. It is just right. The letter sat in its frame on the back bar where the light could reach it once a day. People did not comment at first. That is the way of small towns. They notice and they choose to pretend they have not until the moment comes when noticing will do some good. A few who read it put their hands on the wood the way a person touches a tombstone and feels the rough edge of carved names. One woman smiled at the ribbon, and the green made her think of the pasture where her husband had taught their son to drive an old truck with a sticky clutch. She told me without telling me. I said that the clutch on my delivery door stuck too. We both understood that we were not discussing mechanics. I did not speak about Branson when people asked how I knew him. I said he had been an officer once and that we had served in the same theater, and that was the end of it, if someone pressed. I talked about the weather in that country, the way dust can taste metallic and the way rain can smell like relief even when it brings mud that swallows a tire in one slow bite. They nodded and put away the question they had planned to ask about ghosts. I slept better, not long, not deep, better. The mind will accept a bargain if the terms are fair. The letter had set terms I could meet. It did not erase. It did not restore. It reckoned. I could stand inside that. If this story carries something you needed, leave a small mark. A like, a share, a note to someone who wears their quiet like armor, not for numbers, for reach. There are rooms waiting for this kind of air. Toward the end of the second week, a delivery boy brought a small bag I had not ordered. Inside was a frame stand finished in black, no card, no receipt. I set it on the bar and propped the letter on it so that the words stood at eye level for anyone who came closer than a glance. It looked right, clean, honest, unafraid. Night fell and the neon wing laid itself across the pavement again. I turned the open sign to closed and stood for a while with the lights low, the way you do when you want to hear whether a room will speak. In the faint reflection on the back bar, I saw the letter my hands. The small square of light that came from a street lamp 2 blocks down. I breathed. I did not count. I did not pray. I stood there like a soldier receiving orders from a silence that finally meant me no harm. Morning would come. The door would swing and the bell would ring and someone would ask if the coffee was strong today, and I would say stronger than yesterday if you need it to be. But that night gave me something steadier than sleep. It gave me a way to stand without permission while the world decided whether to remember my name. I had been erased once. This was not a restoration. This was a record set straight where it matters most, in the room where people live. Evening leans soft against the windows, a slow wash of amber that turns the bottles warm and the wood richer. I set the first row of clean glasses upside down on a towel and listen to the sounds that tell me the day is still holding. A cue ball kisses a rail and does not fall. A chair leg scoots an inch and stops. The bell over the door answers the air without hurrying. It is the hour when people come in because light is leaving and no one likes to watch it go alone. The letter sits in its frame where the sun can find it once a day. Now the last slice of light has slipped low enough to strike the glass at an angle. The reflection lifts a thin sheen across the ceiling, a pale shimmer that moves like a bird considering flight. I do not look straight at it. I let it do what it came to do, which is to remind the room that not everything holy needs a name. Danner is here early, boots crossed, cup cupped in both hands. He watches the door the way men do who have learned that trouble always favors entrances. The old Marine has chosen the soft stool without asking, and when his hip settles, he lets out one breath through his nose that says thank you better than words. The medic from the feed store studies a crossword and pretends not to notice that he always chooses clues about rivers and roads. I keep the counter moving, slow circles, no show. They arrive just after the hour. A string of young service members still wearing the posture of the day. Fresh haircuts, fresh jokes. One is too loud because he is learning how to turn the volume down without losing himself. One keeps touching the spot where a rifle sling would live if this were a different room. One carries the air of a class clown until his eyes land on the frame and the clown steps back. They bring in the draft of youth and lay it across the bar like a map that has not been folded yet. I meet them halfway. What is strong, one asks, and I tell him we pour two kinds of strength here. One you can drink, one you borrow by sitting. He grins, then glances again toward the back bar. The group orders in bursts, then spreads out, then settles in a loose circle that leaves the sight line to the frame clear. They do not think they are looking at it, but they are. People always are. The light climbs a little, catches the ribbon at the bottom edge of the glass, and flickers. The loud one goes quiet. The one with the absent rifle sling squares his shoulders by reflex and then remembers he is off duty and lets them fall. A woman in desert boots leans forward and squints as if she is learning to read a new alphabet. I see the moment when they finish sounding out each line and the room shifts a half degree towards stillness. Their chatter does not stop. It softens as if something larger deserves the air. I delivered the first round and set down a bowl of pretzels that no one asked for. I am not trying to mother them. I am making it easy to stay longer than planned. The loud one thanks me too eagerly, then catches himself and thanks me again the way he will thank a senior NCO someday, eyes steady, chin level. He has a good face for learning. He will do fine when he remembers that listening is a force multiplier. They drink the way young people do, with optimism. They trade stories that look like bravado and smell like fear from where I stand. I heard a detail about an instructor who believed in pain as pedagogy and another about a night run when the sky felt 3 inches above the head and a cadence that sounded like a prayer no one meant to say out loud. They mention units without explaining them and badges without flaunting them. They have not yet learned how much of themselves they are already giving away in the way they say mom and sir. It is not obedience, it is hope. 10 minutes pass, then 15. They ask the questions people always bring to this counter, though not always in words. Does it get easier? Does it ever feel normal to carry a weight you cannot name? Do the dreams sort themselves out if you outweight them? I answer the way I always answer. Some things get lighter, some things get true. Both are better than easy. The woman in boots nods at the frame. She does not ask. She points with her chin and gives me the look of someone checking a wind before a jump. I nod back. Someone put it there, she says. Someone wanted it to be seen. Yes, I say, someone did. They digest that. It is enough for now. Outside, a pickup backfires and 3 heads turn in the same direction at the same angle before anyone thinks to laugh. I pour a little water into a planter by the window and watch the soil go dark in a circle that looks like a target until the plant claims it and looks more alive. It is a small thing. The room notices anyway. They migrate toward the back bar in 1s and 2s, pulled without meaning to be. They do the math of the handwriting, the stamp, the name. The loud one goes first and finishes last. When he has read it twice, he lifts a finger and touches the frame at the corner where the glass meets the wood. It is not a caress, it is a calibration. The woman stands square to the letter and holds herself at attention for half a beat before she breathes. The slingless one keeps his hands in his pockets so he will not reach out and try to claim what is not his. Danner watches over the rim of his cup and does not interfere. He understands that reverence can be startled like a deer. The old Marine pivots on his stool, back straight, eyes bright, lips tight, a man who has learned that the body can stand in for a flag when none is handy. The medic pretends to return to his crossword, but his pencil has stopped moving. One of the young men breaks away and returns to the bar. He studies my face as if there is a code to solve there. There is. He will not learn it by studying. He clears his throat, then lowers his voice to a place only I can hear. He says he grew up on stories that came without names. He says every time he saw a nameless story, he tried to imagine whether the nameless person was brave or bad or both. He says the letter feels different. The letter feels like a person trying to set a bone before a body grows crooked around it. He asks if that makes any sense. I tell him it makes perfect sense. I tell him sometimes the most courageous sentence a person writes is the one that starts with "I lied." He thinks about that, then says he had not thought about the first two words being the hard part. I tell him they always are. He nods, then returns to the others. I watch them speak softly, a circle of heads bent, a small council inside a world that applauds noise. The ambient noise rises and falls the way it does when a place is healthy. A couple argues gently about a bill that will be paid by the 15th. A father teaches a child how to roll a cue ball without slamming it. The radio whispers a song that was a hit before these kids were born, and for a moment, a few of them look as if they can see their parents young and unsure and still standing. The letter absorbs the room and gives back something steadier than inspiration. It gives back proportion. The woman in boots approaches the bar. She sets her cup down and draws a small circle in the water ring. She does not look at me when she speaks, which is one way brave people speak. She says that her father told a story about a convoy, and a voice on the radio that sounded like calm had decided to live in a person. She says he never knew the name and stopped looking because sometimes you do not ask the ocean for its number. She asks if the voice belonged to a pilot or a controller or a ghost. Her mouth is almost smiling. She knows what she has asked is not fair. I say a voice is sometimes all three: pilot, controller, ghost. She breathes out through her nose. She says she figured. She says thank you for the pretzels, then takes her cup and returns to the frame. She is learning how to carry a question without forcing it open. They order a second round and loosen the top buttons on their shirts and forget their posture for a while. They let the room hold them the way men and women in the field let a safe valley hold them when it finally appears after a long stretch of bad ideas and worse roads. They are young enough to believe the future is a place you reach by running faster. They are old enough to suspect you might also reach it by standing still and letting the right things arrive. It happens at the natural end of the evening when the floor has learned their footsteps and the sky outside has shrugged on a darker shade. They gather near the register to settle up. The loud one pays for two he did not drink because buying rounds is a second language he speaks with an accent but means well. The slingless one counts change with the concentration of a man who knows small units add up to big missions. The woman in boots lingers 2 beats after the receipts are signed, then faces me with a steadiness that asks for no special mercy. She says the thing out loud that everyone else has been circling. She says, "Ma'am, were you really Ghost Falcon?" The room learns a new silence, the kind that comes without tension. Danner stops breathing for the space of 1 heartbeat. The old Marine sets his palm flat and waits. The medic looks at the crossword like it might have an answer for a question printed in different ink. I let the question sit where she put it. I listen for anything in myself that wants the credit or the refuge. Neither speaks. What answers is simpler. It is the same voice that once lifted out over a ravine and asked a man to move 3 feet into the shadow because 3 feet was the difference between being found by fire and found by morning. That voice does not need names. It needs clarity. I tell her this. I tell her the names we make for each other in war are useful, not permanent. I tell her some ghosts prefer to keep 1 wing in the dark because it helps them see where the light needs to go. I tell her that somewhere once, a woman did what the day asked of her and then put the day away. If you want it simple, I say she flew once. No one exhales until they realize they have been holding a breath. The line in the shoulders of the young men eases. The woman smiles without the edge she brought in with her. The loud one nods as if he has heard the exact order he needed. The slingless one looks at the frame once more and salutes it with his eyes, which is a thing young people do when they are not sure whether a real salute is allowed in a place with bar stools and chalkboards. They thank me the way people thank a church for staying unlocked after hours. They promise to come back, which may be true or may be the sweet talk of those who still believe time is made of endless rooms. They go. The door closes on their heat, and the bell makes the same small sound it always makes, which is the kindness of repetition. The room stretches. The night takes its place. Danner finishes his coffee and taps twice on the wood near the frame, not touching the glass, touching the idea of it. The old Marine tips 2 fingers off his brow and does not say good night, because good night sounds like a wish you might not get to keep, and he is a man who keeps his wishes folded tight. The medic draws a line through the final river and looks relieved to find it was not a hard one. I clear the tables and wipe the rings and count the drawer. I turn the music down until it is only a thread. I check the lock on the back door and the pane that needed putty. Now firm and quiet. The letter gleams once more before the overheads go to a low blue that keeps a place from feeling abandoned. The ribbon in the frame is just a shade of green now, no longer shining, the color of fields waiting for morning. This is where the voiceover lives for those who will hear it later when the camera returns to this counter and does not blink. It is not a speech. It is not a sermon. It is a breath. Some names never make the records. That is all right. Ink is a poor home for heavy things. Honor chooses bone and habit, and the way a hand lifts without being told when someone who kept you alive once walks into the room. If you needed to hear that tonight, consider this your cup set on the bar, warm and waiting. Tap like if you carry quiet weight. Subscribe if you want a seat that will hold week after week. Send this to the one who still listens for a voice in the static. Tell them the frequency is open. Tell them the picture is clear. I switch the sign to close and watch the neon wing lie down across the pavement like a tired guardian. The room is empty now, but it is not alone. Rooms remember. Bars like this learn how to stand watch. The letter keeps its post without complaint. The reflection on the glass lifts one last time, a faint suggestion of motion, and then settles into stillness that does not feel like an ending. In the morning, the sun will come sideways through the window and find the frame again. Somewhere a bus will hiss to a stop and start children on their day. Somewhere a unit will form up and wonder which part of them will be different by lights out. Somewhere a nurse will pocket an extra pen because she has learned that paperwork finds the tired at the worst moments. Somewhere a man will reach for a door and hesitate because memory has a weight, and then he will step through because living is heavier and somehow better. Here on this counter, a story has chosen where to live, not on a wall in a museum, not on a page that needs a password. In the quiet between clinks and chairs, where a young soldier can touch a corner of a frame and remember to square his shoulders without hardening his heart. In this way, a woman can ask the question and accept an answer that is not a name but a direction. Before I turn out the lights, I check the frame one more time. The glass is clean. The wood is straight. The letter holds its line. I reach up and press 2 fingers lightly to the edge, not to claim it, not to bless it. To promise that the room will keep doing its job. A place can be a vow if you let it. I lock the door. The night air is kind. The wing of neon fades. Somewhere a train draws breath, low and steady, and then lets it go. I stand a moment on the step with the key warm in my hand and think of all the unnamed who have stood without permission and did not fall. The thought is not sweet. It is clean, dedicated, if dedication means anything at all. To every soldier erased, but never forgotten. I've worn many uniforms in my life, dress blues, sand-stained fatigues, a bartender's apron, but the heaviest one was always the silence I carried. Not every soldier comes home with a folded flag or a shining medal. Some of us return with stories no one will ever read, names that never appear in the records, battles fought in shadows where no spotlight reaches. But I've learned something in the quiet corners of this life. Honor does not need an audience. It needs witnesses. If there is anything this journey has taught me, it's that strength is not always the roar. It is often the one who stays standing when the room forgets their name. We do not endure applause. We endure for the ones beside us, for the voice on the radio, for the hand that lifted us once in the dark. You may never wear a uniform. You may never salute. But if you've ever carried a truth alone, if you've ever walked through a door no one held open, If you've ever stood without being seen, then this story belongs to you too. Out there, someone still listens for the call sign that never answers back. Someone still wonders if what they did mattered. If you know that person, send them this. Let them know we salute with what we have. If this story stood with you tonight, consider standing with it, like this video. Share it with someone walking their own quiet road. And if you believe forgotten soldiers deserve a place to be remembered, subscribe to Military Revenge. I'll be here, the coffee will be strong, and the light will stay on.